Hello, and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Kathy Watson of the 144th District in Bucks County. One of the biggest, and I think the most important challenges facing the state legislature each year is the adoption of the state budget. Governor Corbett has proposed a budget that holds the line on spending, but it's now the legislature's job to craft a spending plan for the next fiscal year. Joining me to discuss this year's budget is the Majority Appropriations Chairman from Springfield, Delaware County, which is where I grew up, so I have to get that in, Representative Bill Adolph. Thank you so much, Representative Adolph. I can't often say Bill, for being here and talking about it.
It's nice to be here, Kathy.
I guess, can you start by giving, I get all the time, and I'm sure you still do too, people really don't quite get what is the budget process. I mean, they know, and they know it's our most important job, but the steps in the budget process, I mean, they're all pretty much still hung up on that February date. The governor issued a budget, and they said, well, that's it. And I'm going, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, the governor has to do his constitutional required speech proposing a budget, and I call it a blueprint, because a governor's budget in February has never become the actual budget. Okay, we have an advantage over the governor from this standpoint. We have several more months to see what the revenues actually are as compared to his projections, and he can only project based upon what has gone on so far in that fiscal year. So we have an advantage that way. But he sets a parameter for us, and then we go through budget hearings, 3 weeks of budget hearings. And it's just like any CEO of a large company or a township manager, and they bring in their department heads, and you go through their budget.
And we had them all on PCN that we've just finished. So I like the transparency that the general public, if you're around, particularly in the day, but you could sit and watch and know what they're saying.
No question about it. The Senate does it, the House does it, the cabinet members come in. We bring in presidents of universities, both state-related and state-owned. We brought in horse breeders. We brought, so we try to bring all the folks involved in the state budget. And obviously, our first question is, based upon last year's budget, how are you making out? Because most of these departments received somewhere between a 5 to a 12% decrease last year. And it's hard to talk about a budget without mentioning that, we lost 12% of our revenue the year before because we lost federal stimulus money. I
was going to ask that and say people don't understand what that means and what it's done.
And, it makes it difficult because, our priorities are based upon the needs of Pennsylvanians. And 40% of our state budget is spent on education. And we lost $1 billion of federal stimulus money in education alone. So a lot of folks think that the state legislature or the Governor Corbett signed a budget last year that decreased spending in education, when in fact there was more state tax dollars in education in last year's budget than the year before. Now, that was because we were able to move some money around and cut out some waste and abuse in other departments. But that happened last year. So we have a little bit more time. The cabinet members have another years of experience of administrating their departments. And hopefully our revenues will continue to meet our projections of 3.5% growth.
But I remembered we were very circumspect, careful, and responsible that our projections for revenues, we really made sure we thought they were on target, but we weren't planning because we've been in such an economic downturn. And I guess what I try to remember to tell people, it takes, am I not correct? You're the accountant too, so qualified for this job, I would add. It's 18 months that as recovery comes to the whole country and to Pennsylvania, it's 18 months the government lags behind.
Yeah, that's true, Kathy. And we used the 3.5%, and most economists will tell you, coming out of recession, sometimes you can increase revenues by 6%. But we are, this is a very, very slow recovering recession nationwide. And that's why we have to be very careful that we don't trigger inflation. And, so we're trying to take our time. We're trying to balance our budget, which we have to do, and just move the priorities around based upon conversations that we have with legislators who are talking to folks back home.
Right. Now, you mentioned the federal stimulus, and I know that's been a real issue because people didn't all understand. But can you talk even a little more about the stimulus funds and how they factored into it? I think you mentioned education, and how do we account for that? And people need to understand it's as if holes just appeared in the budget, even when you were scrupulously careful about your projections. It's as if we knew there were just going to be downturns, period, because the money wasn't going to be there.
Yeah, I mean, when Congress passed the Stimulus Act, all states received federal money for various projects. And Pennsylvania was receiving about $3 billion a year. Some went to transportation needs, some went to education needs, and a lot went to what we call the Department of Welfare, the Department of Public Welfare. And that's, to me, sometimes gives a very negative reaction to people. And Kathy, it is what it is, but there's, we need to expand that. It's a lot of health issues. Some of our most needy people are involved in that, the disabled. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to separate the welfare lines from the social service end
right.
of it.
And my thing was always, I was taught growing up that government was there to help those who absolutely, positively cannot help themselves.
Yes.
And therefore, that line or that help, even in times of bad budgets, I thought had to be there.
Yes, and you're right, because in that Department of Public Welfare budget, which is, I'm going, for the sake of rounding things off, $10 billion, 40% of our budget, 80% is federal mandated to begin with.
Right.
Okay, so, and that's why they're in that welfare line. We probably could turn that department into two other departments at least, which I think probably needs to be done. But we don't do it because it draws down federal money.
Right, and I was going to make that point. We
Yes.
do that. Somewhat people have to understand. In doing some of the things we do are mandated by the feds, but the feds give us some money toward it. Maybe not a lot, but we do. You use it to get other money.
No question about it. And our hospitals, throughout the Commonwealth, they realize that, and we've worked with them in order to develop formulas to draw down some federal money, because we have a responsibility to those citizens of Pennsylvania that, to no fault of their own, they were dealt a bad hand, and they need services.
Right.
They need services, and we're going to provide those services. We got to just make sure that these hard-earned tax dollars are getting to the folks that really need it.
But it brings up a point, Bill, I think that we have to talk about, and that now we're, I guess, midway through our budget process because we've had our hearings and we're really getting down into it. Can you talk a little bit about now the challenges that have to be considered as we move towards the final budget? I thought your analogy, by the way, for a blueprint was great, because essentially then I thought that's perfect to say to people, because then I can say, in effect, we supply change orders. That
Right.
any blueprints
Sure.
there when you build a house or do it, but you
Right.
know you're going to find problems along the way, and you'll have to have some change orders. The trick is that we are not going to up the bottom line. That'll end up
Right.
costing more. But can you talk about some of the challenges? I'm not sure everybody understands.
Well, the number one challenge is we watch the revenues on a daily basis. And February, since the governor proposed his budget, revenues have increased. The month of February was above projections. I can tell you right now, March is going to exceed projections as well. Okay?
I like hearing that. That's good.
That's good. And April is always our best month of the year because that's when we get the money from people who are filing their taxes and so forth, and the corporations are paying their taxes at the end of March, and the money's coming in April. So March and April historically are our best months. So that gives us an idea of our revenue, and that's the biggest challenge. If March is a bust and April is a bust, we have some real difficult problems. But right now, I'm being cautiously optimistic that the revenues are going to come in on budget, if not a little bit better. The governor had a $700 million deficit built into his budget. So if we can cut that in half, that's $350 million that we had projected that the governor didn't figure in here. So that's our biggest challenge. The next is to make sure that some of the line items that we know we have to do, and that's the accountability block grant with the school districts.
Right.
And we got to hear feedback from our County Commissioners Association. I've already met with our county council in Delaware, and I'm sure you've heard from your county commissioners.
Bucks County Commissioners,
you
right.
know, regarding this new idea of a block grant instead of putting them in silos and a lot of strings attached to them. And I think they like the idea, they like the flexibility, but they certainly didn't think 20% was the right decrease.
Right. Our Human Services Director talked about that. He said, you can't ask me to do all of this new. I'm very open to the concept of a block grant and whatever. He said, but I thought it was going to be that Bucks was going to be maybe a pilot for the Southeast or whatever and do it. It wasn't supposed to be just everybody. He said, and then the huge cut. How do I manage to take care of those we've just talked about, those who absolutely positively need help with government?
So that's what we're trying to do. Then we get into the question of higher ed. That's always a challenge. We have 14 state-owned universities. I mean, we own them. They're ours.
Right.
I mean, the governor, he wanted to cut them 50% last year. We got it down to like 18, 19%. It was still a cut. Then comes back this year with another 30% cut. So we heard from them say, well, you didn't get 50% in 1 year, now it's up to 50% in 2 years. We're trying to work with the state system and trying to restore some of their funding as well. So the biggest challenge, Kathy, as you know, it takes 102 members of the House to agree on a budget. It takes 26 senators to agree on a budget. And then the governor has to sign it. So that's the biggest challenge, and it takes courage. It takes courage, but that's why we have to put together the best possible budget for the state of Pennsylvania.
Right, and I think recognizing when you said it takes courage, we are down due to some forces way beyond our control with the world economy and the national economy and then Pennsylvania's economy. None of the choices that we are about to make are good ones or anything that you want to do.
It's difficult, but you know, when you look back, and when the previous administration started, the government spending in Pennsylvania was $20 billion a year. $20 billion. His last proposal was $29 billion. Yeah. A $9 billion increase in 8 years. That's a 33% increase in spending, and at the same time the cost of living was 19%. So we were on a course where we couldn't sustain it, and we had to turn that ship around. And
the reconciliation, I think that's the correct term that was used in accounting, but that reconciliation is going to be difficult. It's going to be hard fought. And it's not all done in a year. It's changing it all around.
That's correct. And there's a lot of new programs that were started, with federal stimulus money, and the stimulus money's not there. That's correct.
Well, not to end on a bad note, but that's all the time that we have for today's program.
Yeah.
I certainly hope, and I'd ask you, that we get together again as we move a little further down the process, and we'll give everybody an update on where we are as we move closer to that June 30th deadline.
Okay.
But if you have any questions about this or any of the legislative topics, My contact information will be on the screen in a moment. I thank you for watching, and please join me again for Legislative Report.